Welcome back. Even though everybody gets a mail-in ballot in New Jersey, people apparently still want to deliver them in person, creating long lines outside of Board of Election offices like this one in Monmouth County. Here's Monmouth County Clerk Christine Hanlon to talk about it. Thank you so much for talking to us. We reached out to Monmouth County because we saw the stories on the long lines outside for people that were showing up with their ballots instead of mailing them in. And to my first point was, boy, I thought that was the whole reason they had mail-in ballots, so people wouldn't show up. Do you know what's going on?
Yes, and I agree with you. The whole point of the mail-in ballots was to avoid lines and people congregating. So unfortunately, that did take place in Monmouth County at the Board of Elections office because so many people are wanting to hand deliver their ballot to a person. I think part of it stems from the fact that so many voters are upset that they cannot go to a polling location and vote on a machine in person on election day, even though they can vote a provisional ballot. It's that feeling of, I want to hand deliver my ballot to make sure that my vote is counted.
And the lack of trust comes from the story in the media. I mean, you see the video the other day of the mail that was dropped in an alley. You hear the stories about Patterson. The New York Post had a story just a short time ago about a guy that claims he worked for the Democratic Party that was taking mail-in ballots and filling them out himself. So I guess those stories, accumulation of those types of stories and the things the president has said about it, is that created the mistrust?
Well, I think there's a lot of information out there, and even aside from the stories, just get on social media. There are so many more stories on social media that spread like wildfire, and people are looking at these stories and thinking that there's something going on when a lot of the time there's really nothing going on that's unusual, but it's kind of spreading around, and I think social media has amplified all of that. I mean, we are doing so much social media rapid response to try to cut down on some of the misinformation that's out there. You know, legitimately, there are stories, as you mentioned, legitimate stories of things happening that lead to voter distrust of the process, and then on top of the fact that most of the voters that we're hearing from are so upset about the process. So it's kind of a mix, and coming together, it leads to a lot of voter anxiety and anger and distrust with the process. What we're trying to do, though, our Board of Elections, the County Clerk's office, the Superintendent of Elections, we're all trying to cut down on the misinformation. I actually have a Mythbusters section of my website.
On November 3rd, is it true that people who come to vote in person will not have their vote counted until November 10th?
Yes, except if you bring your mail-in ballot to your polling location. So on election day, you can appear at your polling location, and if you do not have your mail-in ballot with you already voted, you will be given a paper provisional ballot for voting. You will not have access to a machine unless you are a disabled voter who certifies that you're unable to vote on a paper ballot. So all other voters will be given a paper provisional ballot that will be counted no earlier than November 10th. And that's because the county boards of elections have to first count all of the mail-in ballots and then make sure that someone who votes a paper provisional ballot has not already voted a mail-in ballot. So what we're telling people is that if you really want to appear at your polling location on election day, it's best to bring your completed mail-in ballot and drop it off there, because if your mail-in ballot will be counted first.
Universal mail-in balloting, it would seem, is causing a lot of more problems. It's causing a lot more work for clerks and Board of Elections around the state, A, to prevent voter fraud, and B, just to make sure that people aren't even mistakenly voting twice.
On top, yes, absolutely accurate. But on top of that, it's just creating the infrastructure and having the human resources and equipment to deal with this large number of paper. And our election officials in all of the elections really have been working around the clock and creating the infrastructure to deal with something like this has been extraordinarily challenging.
It sounds like you don't agree with the governor when he did this. It doesn't sound like you agree with his decision.
No, I do not. I was one of the election officials who recommended to the governor's office that we mail vote by mail applications to all registered voters throughout the state with a postage paid return, so that voters would be given the choice of whether they wanted to vote by mail or in person. And this was a recommendation made to the governor's office. They did not take the recommendation of many of the election officials because we knew all of these issues would occur with respect to whether it's lines or infrastructure issues or problems with the statewide voter registration system. There are a lot of things that go into planning and executing a universal mail-in ballot type election. And my opinion was that we should have sent out an application so voters could have the choice of whether they wanted to vote by mail or vote on a machine. Because what we are hearing across the board from voters is that they're really upset about this, and they wanted to come and vote on the usual way that they vote in New Jersey.
Well, from all the polls and from past history, it's not going to be close in New Jersey, so at least you have that going for you. Could you imagine if you were in a battleground state, what you'd have to be going through on, like, you might not have the results for a month?
Yes, I totally understand that, and I think everybody acknowledges that. The problem is that you have, in many respects, and in my opinion, elections that are very important going on at the local level. And in counties like Monmouth, we have 53 municipalities. We have school board elections, we have fire district election, we have public questions. And oftentimes elections in Monmouth County can come down to less than 5 votes. So these candidates will be waiting for election results possibly until mid-December. And it's a torturous process, and it's very hard for all of these candidates and campaigns to be waiting for results for that long.
Monmouth County Clerk Christine Hanlon. When Jersey Matters continues, we'll examine the problematic maternal mortality rate in New Jersey. We'll be right back.